Today was Super Bowl Sunday, of course, but it is also, did you know, Emperor Norton's 200th birthday.
In 1973, I became convinced for a while that I was receiving messages from outer space.
I put it on the internet.
I'm a Discordian.
What history does that tell?
Excuse me, I don't understand your question.
You said you're a historian.
I didn't say that.
What did you say?
I am a Discordian.
Hello. This is going to be a talk on Chasing Eris, the book that I put together about the Discordian community, presented both in a series of stories and an occasional piece of poetry. So hello, fellow travellers, and welcome to the glorious story of my exploration of Discordia. Chasing Eris was the name of my book, and together we'll look at the journey I took. In 23 pages, we'll flip through the stages from birth to afterlife. You'll say, "Ugh!" You'll say, "Nice," as I talk about the lives of those who delight in the goddess of strife. 1. I was sitting with friends who were mostly intent for going out clubbing for some kind of event. But one man, not me, had no kind of ID. So I said I'd stay back to keep him company. And while we hang out, I might visit a little website. And lo and behold, it was a delight. Text-only Principia, Discordia was simply a huge influence on me when younger and pimplier. And this is what it looked like! This is the text-only Principia Discordia that I first encountered when I was a young person hanging out in my university days. Those university days were about to come to an end. I got a job teaching, and I was out in a small town, and here I am. There wasn't much to do in this small town, so I took up the hobby of slacklining and a few things like that, and I struggled to be fulfilled creatively. There was not a whole lot to do. It's creative frustration, brain emancipation, outlets needed for exploration. Discordian forums were helping with boredom. When I come home, I'll be editing magazines. When I come home, I'll be editing magazines. And these are the magazines that I was editing. This is Intermittens, a journal of Discordian diarrhea, started, I believe, by Professor Cramulus and some other members of the Discordian community that I was a part of, an internet community known informally as the PD Cabal, because it was on the Principia Discordia forum. So I got in to that forum, and I joined largely to say, oh, this looks fun, this open source magazine, I'll join in, and I'll edit an episode. And here on the left, it's my episode of Intermittens. The person portrayed on the front is Mary Toft, who was known for giving birth to rabbits. And so this sort of idea of truth and perception and people being misled and all that sort of stuff that seemed to me at the time to interlink very heavily with Discordianism really came together in that particular story. And that's an image by a very talented animator who's now gone on to obviously much bigger and better things than this, Mel Roach. Over here is another one that I put together, which was I started to sort of perceive this Intermittens as more of like a not so much a magazine as a like an imprint, and so I helped to edit this, and then it was further editing was done by, I think, again, Cram collaborated with me on this one. There's a lot of people's work in there, and the just a lot of the layout features were improved by Cramulus. Moving on, let's have a look. Two at a time, what's going on? So, all of these ideas were swirling around my head, and I was feeling very stuck at this point in time. when I was out in the in this type of small town. And I was reading a lot, I was learning a lot, and I read this book here called Art of Memetics, and it got me thinking in all these sorts of really crazy things. I was saying, having conversations with people like, could the MBPT, the sort of Jungian identity sort of thing, where you check if you're an INTP or ENTP or whatever, could you use that and basically create yourself distinct personalities that are used as servitors? Could you create an egregore, this sort of collective entity? And the thought that I had was, could you create an egregore by bringing together a group of people, by giving them all one collective experience? People come to a party, and that party kind of holds the group together, or people kind of, have a community built around a certain practice or whatever. And my thought was, could you essentially create that by using yourself as a needle and thread and making the experience of meeting you the thread that connected everything together? So I was in a very magical thinking type space at this point in time, and that was the thought that I had started exploring. And I ended up getting myself to a place where I didn't want to continue with what I was doing, in terms of living in this small town, and things had not really gone quite the way that I wanted them to go. Night falls and chaos calls. You ended up in this place by mistake. Let's make some more errors. Let's make some more mistakes. Let's take this life by the hands and dance with two left feet of folly. Lovers leave, careers lose their way, anchors are lost in the ocean, and the waves sway and chaos says, hey, it's time to play. So I made the choice to leave the job, the town, all the rest of it. And I started putting together a project that would let me do that. And I knew I wanted to travel. I knew that I wanted to write. I thought I'd write about Discordianism because I was hearing about all these stories connected that, as far as I knew, had never really been properly told. I was familiar with Adam Go-Rightly's work about Kerry Thornley, but beyond that, there wasn't sort of a lot that I knew of out there, and it seemed like really fertile ground for talking about a lot of stuff that was going on and happening. So I took this on as my project. And fairly early on, there were some bumps in the road. This is some of the early endorsements that I got from my forum. I don't want to go on about this for too long, but basically, I was writing about a whole bunch of people, and I mentioned a particular character called Reverend Loveshade, who I planned to write about, in part. And that wasn't taken well. People were telling me, no, you can't talk about him, or that's a problem, and so on. And I kind of ended up saying, well, that choice will come out in editing. I'm going to pursue this in the direction that I want to pursue this, which is every direction as much as I can, and we'll make the decision in editing. One of the things I didn't talk about was, and it was difficult for me because I didn't sort of want to give the game up too much, was that I was having a conversation with Gypsy Scripto. So if you read the Principia Discordia, the 4th edition, you go to the back, you'll see an afterword by Greg Hill. And he's being interviewed by somebody called Gypsy Scripto, who is clearly a creation of Hill. Hill created this character in order to interview himself, and, that was the presentation of the afterword that he put together. But I was in contact with Gypsy Scripto, who was apparently a real person, one of the early Discordians, and became very suspicious over a period of time that this person I was speaking to was absolutely not real. And probably the best explanation was that she was a creation of Reverend Loveshade, but she was still organising to meet with me. And I sort of thought, well, what's going on here? How's this going to happen? How is this going anywhere, going somewhere? And I sort of wanted to see how that would play out. But I also didn't know for sure that it was Loveshade. I also didn't know for sure what was going to happen if I was going to meet, like, I don't know, like an old woman that, like, Loveshade gave $50 to pretend to be a Discordian pagan priestess. Like, I don't know what was going to happen. So I sort of didn't want to make promises that I was then not going to be able to keep, and I also didn't want to tell everybody in a public place, hey, I suspect I'm already in contact with Loveshade, and give the game up. So it ended up being a completely moot point. Loveshade gets a mention in the book, like twice, I think. One is because Dr. John brings him up in the context of basically screwing him around in terms of muddying the waters about the story of the Apocrypha Discordia. And the other place is this exactly, is the fact that it caused quite a bit of confrontation in my original Discordian cabal. So we move on to some other things, in theory, if the screen ever changes. But this next one this is Brisbane. These are some of the people I met first of all. Dr. John Swaby, Aaron, Michael, Prenner. So these are some of the just really fantastic people. And I'll say this now because Aaron is on the screen, is that I'm so grateful for the people I was able to speak with, even if they didn't get mentioned, or even if their mentions got, cut down to like a word or a sentence or whatever. I'm so grateful for people's time and everybody here, being some of my first interviews. And sometimes with John, I didn't even turn my recorder on because I was so awkward. I sort of talked and made notes, and it was a lot of learning, and people were very patient with me and very kind to me. And I was grateful for that. It made it all possible, and it made it a positive experience on the whole. So some of the other experiences that I had that helped me to that I'll talk about now is, here's just a couple of other pictures. I want to talk about stuff that I didn't write about in the book terribly much, because I do want to talk a little bit about some uncharted territory, some spaces where I haven't already dealt with all of this in the book. So to the left we've got a photo that I was sent from the band One Eyed Doll. So I was put in contact by One Eyed Doll by a guy called Gabriel Discordia, and we'll see him a little bit later on. He runs a little group called Discordia Merchandising. He runs a whole bunch of stuff. He's really quite, he's got a big footprint within the Discordian space. And it sort of ended up being just the flow of the story kind of directed itself in a certain way, and kind of it made less sense to talk about my experiences with Gabriel and with One Eyed Doll in those respective places versus sort of building those conversations around other things. But this is One Eyed Doll. They were super interesting, super cool band. They didn't really know a lot about Discordianism. It turned out that basically Gabriel had heard them, thought, you guys have a dope sound, rocked up to a performance one day and was just like, hey, I'm going to do your merchandising. And they're like, oh no, we've got someone doing it. He was like, no, I've got like a bag of buttons and stuff. Like, you can have this, and here it all is. And ended up doing quite a bit of work for them. And I met with them, and they didn't know a lot about Discordianism. I actually told them quite a bit about it. Kimberly gave me her chaos hat, which is like a kind of a Joker's hat with little dingly bells on it, which I still have. It's in England. A whole bunch of my stuff's there because of coronavirus-related happenings. But they sent me this picture a few days after our interview, and it's them, and you can sort of see there. It's Kimberly is feeding a deer a golden apple. So I thought that was really cool. The lane where it says lane 4 for Nord, that is, I went and played a game of bowling by myself at the Brunswick Shrine. So that was in Whittier. And man, Whittier is like small and there's like not a lot going on. The Brunswick Shrine is the bowling alley where Eris apparently revealed herself to Mal and Omar. Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley, and there's a lot of speculation about which one it is, and there's no proof that it is the one that people suspect. My understanding is that they were going to knock it down at some point, but I believe that they kept the bowl sign, and you can actually see that sign on the front cover of one of Adam Gorightly's books, Happy Trails to High Weirdness, I think it's called. And I also visited the grave of Joshua Norton, Emperor Norton, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. And that was really cool. I went there, I wandered around, I couldn't see it. I went to the front desk and said, look, I'm searching for this gravesite in particular. And they actually have, like, maps behind the desk because it's so popular to go and visit the Emperor. They actually have these A4 printouts where they're just like, here you go, take that. That will show you where Emperor Norton's grave is. And that was really wonderful. I didn't really talk about any of these things in the book in detail. There was so much that I left out and so much good stuff I left out. And it was generally, I took the angle that I was going to let the story tell itself and tell me where it wanted to go. And there was a particular... It seemed very suggestive in a way. It seemed to very much suggest that it wanted to tell itself in a particular way. And this is how I ended up putting it together. So I continued on. I was heading through the United States. I was in California. I was invited out to Panthea Con. And that was really fantastic. And one of the stories there that I didn't tell about Panthea Con was the Panthea Con newsletter, which was very entertaining. You can see my photographs of it down there. Very, very funny stuff, very cutting, things like, do you like exotic people and cultures? Are you constantly complaining that as a white person, you don't have culture and traditions of your own? Cultural appropriation may be just what you're looking for. So very cutting, very, very funny. And a few years later, there was a controversy that I saw over this one up here that I've put up top, Ignoring Racism, a workshop for white pagans. So I saw that. I thought that was super duper funny. A particular criticism of, a certain type of trend within paganism that a lot of people can recognize. And I found out later this was explicitly a condemnation or a criticism of a group called Covenant of the Goddess. But it was taken quite seriously by a lot of people, and apparently, and to me this is also hilarious, a bunch of people turned up to attend Ignoring Racism, a workshop for white pagans by a large umbrella pagan group. So I've heard, and a lot of people of colour apparently were quite affected negatively by it, and this caused quite a bit of controversy at Panthea Con. Panthea Con is no longer happening. They've had their last one this year, I believe. So that's an institution that is that's actually finished up and isn't continuing on. But that was a really interesting controversy, and there's a lot written on it, and there's certainly worth your while to read up on it if you're interested in that sort of level of pagan or that sort of small community drama. Here's some other people I got to meet with that I didn't really write about at length. Carl Musa was fantastic. We went together to the George Washington, what was it, like the George Washington Freemason exhibition or something like that. It was so dope. I really got a buzz out of it. He was just such a lovely, cool guy. And again, just with terms of things fitting in nicely. And then I'm also pictured there with Gabriel Discordia from Discordian Merchandising. Both guys who were really generous to me, gave me heaps of their time. Gabriel gave me a lift from one destination to another in his car, and just really lovely guys who just were very generous with their time, as was everybody I met, and it just, I originally wrote up every single experience with every single person as an entire chapter, and had 89 chapters, so obviously that wasn't a sustainable situation. Carl Musa does get a shout out in the first couple of chapters, because he was sort of instrumental in getting us a copy of the some pieces of the first Principia Discordia, the first edition, before that was sort of widely discovered. He obtained those materials with in conjunction with John Swaby from the JFK archives. So over here we have one of the places that I stayed in South America, in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and they had a wall, and you could everybody who stayed there was allowed to paint the wall. So I wrote "Hail Eris" in Portuguese, and did a little K apple in the apple, and then I went to Argentina from there. And nobody had told me, but they changed the way you go to Argentina. And it used to be that you had a certain amount of American dollars in cash on your person, which I had. You give that to customs as you come in. But while I was traveling, they changed the process. So all of a sudden, you had to have paid your money in advance. You know, the English language version of the webpage doesn't work on like your mobile format, so I'm struggling through that. In the end, I was able to do it. Needed a physical copy of the paper, and actually, some of the customs officials were very generous to me there, and actually let me give them my username and password so they could log in, print out the document, give it to me, and I got on the flight and went to Argentina. So I was shocked that I got to Argentina. I really, really was under the impression that I was just rooted. I was not going to Argentina. I was stuck. And it was amazing that I got there. Back to Australia after the Americas, and then headed out again to continue on to the UK. And this is skipping forward a little bit. Skipping forward a little bit, but I was there, and there was so much history to talk about, and that all really linked together in a really clear way. That we sort of talked about Robert Anton Wilson and the KLF Illuminatus play as well. So talked about all those things, and then kind of got when Chasing Eris finally came out. I was given, there was a review by Cat Vincent, and he really said, it's a shame that those United Kingdom chapters, don't have that same focus on contemporary Discordianism. They sort of, really focus on, Discordia's past and the history and so on, but sort of living, breathing, Discordianism doesn't sort of really get its shout out particularly. So I went, okay, I can do something about this, and I found a bunch of the interviews that I did in the United Kingdom and a couple, I think one in Ireland as well, and I threw them all together in a document, and I called it United We Fnord, and I bought myself a copy of the Daily Mirror, and I used that to cut out all these things. So I've got it there, and then I was like, shit, I don't have Scotland in there. So I went through all my, my travel propaganda and found, here's Edinburgh Castle, and I cut that out and added that. You can see that, stuck to Theresa May's chin there, and put this together. And Trump's there because that was like a big thing at the time. It was like the Trump baby was like a big British thing. I don't know now that it's sort of done the world tour, but so I put that together like that and went, okay, that's going on, and I sort of wanted to do that as like a bit of an Easter egg, so I put it on Lulu as a free download, but I hid it so that you wouldn't, if you searched for it on Lulu or whatever, you couldn't find it. The idea was that you at some point had to get the link from someone who had put it up somewhere, and you actually had to find it with some degree of intention. You couldn't just stumble across it. So that was that, and that stayed up for about a year and a half, maybe a bit longer. And with this current project that I'm on, this Si Nos Organizamos, because that is all coming up for free, but intended to direct people to my Patreon for early access. At that point, I was like, okay, this has been up for long enough. Now I'm moving it to the Patreon. So if you want a copy of this now, go to the Patreon, because that's the only place you can get it, bucko. And of course, that's Daisy Eris Campbell there, who I saw presenting at the Horse Hospital with John Higgs. And that does get a mention in Chasing Eris, and it also gets a longer mention in United We Fnord. So I went to Helsinki, I went to Finland, and there's a few stories that didn't make it in there as well. And one was, I didn't talk about Peter, who's there with me. I'm holding the pot plant because I thought that would be cool. You can just see the absolute potato quality of the photographs that I took with this particular phone. But with Essie and Hurriko, the four of us went through this tunnel. They're like, oh, we're going to go for a walk through this dark tunnel. Okay. So I've got my phone, I've turned my torch on and I'm looking at the graffiti, being like, oh, this is cool, man. Like, turn it off. Okay. We walked through this tunnel, completely dark, complete pitch blackness. At one point, I touched a gate. I was like, oh, there's a gate, and I tried to open it, and it disappeared. And then crash. Because it was a shopping trolley, right? Somebody had put a shopping trolley there, and when I pushed it, I knocked it over. And that was really cool. That was really an interesting, what I kind of would think of now as a psychedelic experience, that that there are ways to hack or upset or play with your brain in ways that are not, simply related to drug usage or direct impact of that nature. So that was a really positive experience. And I was really surprised when I met Peter, and I didn't include this one, but it was really interesting because his discovery of Discordianism was through me searching for Discordians. And so it was kind of interesting the way that it was very clear that I was, very closely interlinked with this project and what it was and what was happening. I was very much, a living, breathing part of the story that I was telling, and that was, interesting in that way. We went to this gorilla. I wrote about this gorilla, and a few years later it burnt down. And I was really stunned by the picture of it of the burnt gorilla, that's a police photograph of it there. And at the time, I'd been reading a few things, and I'd seen that Robert Anton Wilson quote, where does your fist go when you open your hand? And this thought jumped on me. And it was like, if you could identify every atom in the world, if you were omniscient and you could see everything and exactly where it is, and you could point to one moment in time and say, this is the perfect moment, then the whole trajectory of the universe would be hurtling towards that moment of perfection, and then passing it, and then hurtling away from it for the rest of eternity. And it was this idea that this state of flux and this state of change, is what we do have. It is the constant. It is the nature of the universe we inhabit. And to me, in my head, the gorilla is sitting there peacefully because it knows that, it knows that, it's the distinction between sitting there in its embodied form and sitting there, as a skeleton, it's just that hand moving out of a fist. It's just that transference and that change and that movement of the universe. That is a constant, and it looks like it's at peace with it. And that was a thought that struck me when I was looking at that burnt out gorilla. So we continue onwards. I left Finland. I went throughout Europe, and one of the places I didn't really write about, or didn't publish about, particularly in Chasing Eris, but I did make a brief reference to it, was I went to the Illuminati house. So this is the actual place where the Illuminati used to hold their meetings. And I found out later that apparently if you go around the back of it, there's like a sign and everything that tells you about it, but I didn't know that. I didn't see that, so, but it was Tierenstrasse, criticize my German if you need to, number 23. And it was closed because it was a weekend and it was a bank. And I was so surprised by the whole experience in Ingolstadt, where the Illuminati was founded. Because I was like, man, I'm going to get off the train. It's going to be like, take our Illuminati tour. And, Eye in the Pyramid t-shirts. It's like, I visited the site of the most successful international conspiracy in history, and all I got was this stupid t-shirt. And there's just like nothing like that. And I kind of wonder if, this was like a conscious effort on part of Ingolstadt to kind of not attract, the loonies and the wackadoos and the conspiracy people. I sort of wondered if that was a bit of a conscious decision-making on their part. But I went there and I thought that was really interesting. And I've got actually a piece that I wrote about the Illuminati that I'm really proud of, that I am hoping is going to be publicly available relatively soon. That's one that I'm really looking forward to seeing it come out into the world. So that was my time in part of my time in Germany, and I continued through. I went to the Netherlands, and this was something really fun that we did in the Netherlands. Is somebody brought along, I think it was El Jaco, brought along a whole bunch of Pope cards, or maybe I had the Pope cards and he had the idea. But we had these Pope cards, and he was like, "Oh, I've got some stamps. We're going to send these Pope cards in the mail." So we had these international stamps. Wrote down these addresses. I don't remember. I think that one up there, the very top one, I'm pointing, but you can't tell what I'm pointing to, can you? I think the top one was like maybe to somebody in the Principia. I could see Morimba, so that's where I was living for a while, so I sent one to like my old household. And the next one was like to one of the places that I stayed in in Brazil. So that was really, that was a lot of fun, and that was a bit of, a Jake or, Project Mindfuck, Operation Mindfuck, sort of engaging with that with the Dutch Discordians, and that was a lot of fun. And I also interviewed, or tried to interview Bobbi Campbell, and he sort of said, "Oh, I'm going to give you this instead," and he made me this gorgeous bloody picture, which I loved, and I've actually used it in Eris as the frontispiece, just on the inside cover. And it was pretty funny because he also presented that in. You saw some of the comments that I got in my original forums, and he also posted it in there, and people immediately began like giving him grief, being like, "Excuse me, do you know that you could be misrepresenting Mr. Clutterbuck and telling him that you are not affiliated with Mr. Clutterbuck, and yet you have presented yourself as though you are," and just like these people like. They don't even like me. They're mad at me. So why are they like? So just like to me, that was a really validating moment that there was a particular portion of the community that were just like in a shit, and just really in the mood to be kind of a bit of a down and a bit critical and whatever. So I came home and I was writing. I'm trying to get it all out there. I wrote it. It was 89 chapters. It was ridiculous. It was unreadable crap. I'm editing. And I'm talking about it, and I'm trying to, keep a little bit of enthusiasm going. So this was a Pecha Kucha night that I attended. This is me presenting on Discordianism at this particular event. And I did a lot of stuff like that, trying to talk about what I was doing, trying to write about what I was doing. And as I started to realize that certain things weren't going to be chapters or whatever, I started to send them out. I was talking to publishers, and I had a lot of trouble with publishers because I had very early on, somebody had indicated interest in publishing. And what that meant was I was not shopping the work. For this whole time, I was not shopping the work. So when I got back and that fell through, suddenly I didn't have a publisher anymore. So I'm hunting, I'm searching, I'm looking, I'm hunting, I'm searching, I'm looking. And the way that I was told to do this, and this worked really well for me, is find a couple of pieces, find a couple of works that are similar in nature to yours, and contact those publishers. And one got back to me, very briefly, emailed back and forth, and didn't reply to messages. And at this point, it was kind of, we were running out of time, and I was thinking this piece is getting too old now to appeal to a mainstream publisher. They're going to look at it and say, that was 2013, we're not interested. So, at that point, I made the decision to self-publish. But earlier than that, I was in contact with some other publishers, and I was in contact with Hilarious Press for a hot 5 minutes, and that was really fantastic. And in the end, the type of timeline that they were able to work with was not going to work for either of us, and that sort of led me to move on to something else, which was self-publishing. But I did get to speak with Christina Pearson. And that was just incredibly valuable, and I really appreciated her time and energy there, and was really able to, especially of course, on my chapter with Robert Anton Wilson, of course, I was able to really build on what I knew then, some things that had been popularly circulated. Around the internet or in other sources, she was able to sort of confirm the reality of those things. And she also, it was a bit of a reality check with one part because I quoted somebody as saying, I think I quoted Sondra London as saying, Kerry was upset because Robert Anton Wilson never got over the thought that Kerry had somehow been involved in the death of Robert Anton Wilson's daughter Luna. And I knew that, I suspected heavily that to not be true. But I had also taken on the explicit intention of not editorializing too much, to sort of take that tack of writers like Robert Anton Wilson and to present things without overly editorializing and consciously forcing the reader to read with a degree of skepticism. And Christina kind of made me do a double think on how I approached that. So I added I did editorialize that particular comment. And at the very start of the book, I added a comment to the effect of, this is what I'm doing. I have intentionally presented you with the facts as they were presented to me. And there's a few places where I actually sort of mess around with that a bit. There's two that stayed in there and one that didn't go in. One was this lovely moment in Brazil where they tell me, there are these chains at the top of the rock, and I have no idea what they're for. But I asked somebody, and he was like, I think Reggie Maldonado told me this. They're like, oh yeah, that's where they chain the strippers up. Yeah, every night they bring strippers up here, and they chain them up so that the giant eagle has something to eat, and it eats the strippers and flies away, and then people have to take the arms away at night because the eagle leaves the arms there. And it was just such an absolutely straightforward delivery of this story. And I did not challenge it at all. I was just like, I'm just going to take that at its face value. And then there was another story like that where they told me in Germany, they made mention of, some of the German Discordians made mention of, I was working at the hospital and fighting zombies and doing this other stuff. I sort of nodded, yeah. But just that particular quote had to be cut to make things fit. So the zombies went with it. It wasn't worth twisting the whole nature of that chapter to get this lovely zombies quote in, especially since I'd already kind of done, put this little mental landmine in with keeping the stripper-eating eagle in the story. And the other place where I intentionally kind of engineered it for skepticism is in the House of Discord chapter. They talk about pig's blood being splashed over the wall. And at one point somebody calls it pig's blood, at one point somebody calls it cow's blood. And I was just like, I loved that. I really, really loved that. And I was like, I'm not going to clarify it, I'm not going to correct it. I'm going to leave those quotes exactly as they are, in order to confront the reader with the fact that there is a disagreement about what actually happened. And that for that to be an unresolved conflict. And, kind of as a way of hopefully reminding the reader of, you have to read this critically. You have to engage critically with this and the world, in order to make sense of things. So saying before that while I was, working on trying to edit and get published and all the rest of it, one of the things I was doing is I was identifying some pieces that were not going to make it to the final copy of the book. And I was approaching different publishers about it. And a few of them got picked up. A heavy metal blog took my One-Eyed Doll interview. This is an atheist magazine that took my piece with Hagbard Celine that ended up getting reprinted in United We Fnord. A bunch of stuff went up on Historia Discordia, which of course, was developed in the days leading up to, the weeks and months leading up to, the end of the Eris project, because Adam Golightly had come in contact with a whole heap of new materials around the time that I was starting this journey. And so I was putting that out there. I kind of felt bad about this one because you can see there it says Pope card seems legit. And that was actually an image that Gabriel, again, had supplied me. And I'd supplied these guys, and I said, oh, you know, this image is courtesy of Discordian merchandising, which they did not use as the as you know as the thing down there. They just said, you know, Pope card. So if you want your gold Pope card, you know, go to Gabriel, just go to Discordian merchandising, because yeah, that image credit was not kind of presented as I passed it on to them, and you know, I think Gabriel was a little displeased that things, you know, that he didn't get the credit for the image that he had provided to me. So this is one of my favourite pieces that I've written. I really loved that piece there. We got to the point of publication, self-publication. I contacted Alex Screen, who I knew because he had put out all these just wonderful artistic presentations of Discordian saints. And he'd also, more recently, with the Confestival that they did for Daisy Eris Campbell's Cosmic Trigger, he'd also provided some of the designs for the Robert Anton Wilson trading cards. So I knew him through these kinds of channels, and this is his cover. And I was very, very hands-off. I tried to sort of say, you know, put forward a few ideas, but generally tried to not direct the process too much, because I sort of wanted to have that chaotic mentality, you know, let things develop themselves. And these were some of the images that he sent through as, you know, as proposals, and you can sort of see the development of it from where to go and how it all panned out. And I just think it is, I am so grateful for his creative work, because it looks just like dope. Like I'm just so in love with the cover. It's just this bloody beautiful piece of artwork. So I wanted to have a book launch. I did my book launch. Here's the pictures of it here. There's the little advertisement from it that a guy called Mozak put together for me. I put up an advertisement. He's like, "Oh man, cool advertisement. Can I screw around with it and do something with it?" I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." So he went and did his own edits of it and you know, put his own sort of take on it. And I looked at it and I was like, "Oh man, the launch of, that's like the Temple of Psychic Youth, right?" And he was just like, "Sure, yeah," you know, it was totally, you know, not the intention of it. But there it is. That's I had a little launch locally, Trinity Beach Hall. It's not, you've never heard of it. It's in the middle of Cairns. It's not a big place. And you can see there, you know, that every copy that I signed and I nose printed each of those copies, you know, in reference to the Principia Discordia. And you can sort of see in the background there that the other thing I had was I got a bunch of books and a bunch of pieces of paper and all the stuff that I was given, you know, over the course of the journey. And I laid it out on tables so people could browse, you know, all that material. And you can see that I've got my phone while I'm reading, and that's because when I did a reading, I also followed in the steps of one of the Panthea Con rituals, which is that I wrote my phone number on the whiteboard and said, I want everybody to turn their phones on, make sure that the volume is up nice and high, And I'll read out texts if you send me texts while I'm doing my reading. And it was a lot of fun, very chaotic. The book came out. I got lots of different responses. I got some really lovely, positive responses. You can see some of those there. A Marvelous Journey, an excellent book. Whoa. Really, really lovely, generous things that people were saying. Kat Vincent wrote me a wonderful review, which is, I love it because it is absolutely the purpose of reviews. It says some good things about the book. It gives some clear, practical suggestions, and it was really worthwhile. And that's the review that led to United We Nord, because it made that particular criticism of why does the United Kingdom miss out on having these sorts of contemporary stories. So here's another piece of criticism I got that was a bit negative. I thought that I included this one because I thought that it was maybe laying it on a bit thick with the description. I stuffed up. I did get this checked by people and whatever, but nobody picked this up. I misquoted the Thelemic principle. Said, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, instead of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Now, in my limited defense, the context of this, of me quoting that, or misquoting that, is in an accurate explanation of what that phrase is actually intended to mean. So it's not like, it was completely misleading. But I got this very intense thing that it was as though you have not only drawn a picture of Prophet Muhammad, you have portrayed him as deformed and Japanese. So that was a bit wild. I corrected that. That was, even though that description is very intense, it was my screw up, and I did repair it in the end. But I also wanted, this one was weird because he posted this on somebody else's wall, the person who had this objection, on somebody else's wall with the caption, looks like somebody didn't fact check their chapter. And this was true, and I feel worried that I'm going to interrupt some sort of magical channel of energy by mentioning this, but there was a particular chapter that never got fact checked, because every time I asked for it to be fact checked, I got silence. And then sometimes I'd talk to one of those people and they'd chat with me and I'd say, oh, by the way, can you look at your chapter? And there was silence. So I ended up developing this theory that there was this psychic magical agreement that this chapter was was to be left alone, was to not be interrupted, that there was this psychic separation between the people that it focused on and the chapter itself, because it was to that point. It was to that point of I would talk about something else, having a conversation, bring up the chapter. So I was like, oh man, there's some sort of magical conspiracy here that some sort of communing of energy. So I hope I haven't, gone and, blown up all that magical energy or anything, but that was just a bizarre sort of set of circumstances from my end, from the terms of my experience of it. Especially when, you get into Discordianism and you get into this very magical, surreal headspace. And the final image that I'll leave you with is wonderful Essie reading the book. And it's a buzz to see that. It's a buzz when people have sent me pictures of themselves holding my book, or their bookshelves and it's one of the books in it, or any of that stuff, or a review, or sent me a message on Twitter saying, I read your book, and even if it's just to say, I read your book, you don't know how to use commas, loser, or whatever. I mean, nobody's done that, but even that is like, oh man, hear what that person said? They read my book. It is so gratifying and humbling, you know, to know that people engage with a creative thing that I made, and I am grateful for that. And it's the end point of that particular journey, but you know, it's the continued life of that journey in some sort of in the form of the artifact that it's all led to. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the people who've connected with me on this journey in any way. And that's the story around chasing Eris.
That turned the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that?
I'm a malfunctioning robot.
Snort is a word coined in 1965.
In summary, chaos, disorder, confusion, illusions imposed and supposing we know where it's all going to go is a big fat N with a nice round O. Predicting, assuming, and certain asserting we'll see situations that lead to some hurting pretendings. It's making some straight kind of sense. It's unconscionable nonsense. Don't you be so dense. Instead, why not try and decide that you might reinterpret disorder in a new type of light, a force of great power, but also a way to create, innovate, be playful, and say, Hail, Eris.